Welcome to the Talking Risk podcast. We discuss all things risk, hazard mitigation, insurtech, industry insights, and more. I am your host, Brian Harris, and joining us today is Ralph Hines, risk control specialist with over 30 years of industry and safety experience. Welcome, Ralph.
Hey, thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
Today, we're going to talk about automatic sprinkler systems and risk control. And this topic, I think, is very important for our customers, the business owners, even our agents from a knowledge standpoint. So today, we're going to talk about a variety of things dealing with sprinklers, from the history of sprinkler systems up through the various types of systems, how from an insurance and risk control standpoint, we evaluate sprinkler systems, why it's important to evaluate them, benefits and importance of water supply to sprinkler systems. And then we'll touch briefly on some of the different types of occupancies or storage arrangements that present specific or special challenges for sprinkler systems. So you might be interested to know that automatic sprinkler systems have been around for almost coming up on 150 years. And they are basically, when you look at a technical definition, they're what they say they are. You know, they are defined as devices for automatically distributing water on a fire in sufficient quantity to control the fire. And according to the National Fire Protection Association, there's a quote here that I think is important to kick us off. It says, "For protection and safety of property and life, automatic sprinklers are considered to be the best investment that a property owner can make." So Ralph Hines is with us again today, our risk control specialist here at FCCI in the Gulf Coast region. And Ralph, I know you and I have been working hard over the past few years, especially with our team, in beefing up our knowledge and our capabilities with evaluation of sprinkler systems. Anything you'd like to add as we get started here about the importance of sprinklers and what they mean for fire protection?
Well, hey, nice to see you again, man. It's good to be back and talk about things we both love and have a passion for. So, nothing really to add, to the truth. Sprinkler systems, as you mentioned, been around for a long time, and the first designs were so simple too, right? They were just holes in pipes. Connected to some type of water supply. They had to manually turn it on at that time, which is one of the differences now. So very interesting if you look back at it from a historical standpoint. So excited a little bit about this one.
Good deal. And, I think something else we should point out here at the beginning is that I think there's a perception, maybe on our side of the equation, on the risk control and insurance side, we see an ever increasing importance and a stringent look at adequacy of a sprinkler system. Is it adequate for the occupancy of that building, or is it adequately designed for the storage inside the building or the type of operation? We must, us on the insurance side, as well as our customers, our policyholders, I think it's important to not lose sight of the fact that prevention is key, right? Sprinklers provide protection and control once a fire starts, but it is critically important that we not lose sight of the fact that preventing a fire from occurring in the first place is very important. And there's a study that was done by NFPA, and I think they do it every year, every other year. This one, the quote I have here is from 2013, and it said, "Studies by NFPA indicate that sprinklers operated in 91% of the fires that were large enough to trigger them, and they were effective in 96% of these fires." So It's important to have a sprinkler system, yes, and it's important that it operates, that it's maintained. Equally important is the prevention aspect of the whole fire risk equation.
Yeah, statistics are overwhelming and they're so consistent. I've looked at a couple of different studies, and the 90% area ballpark for sufficiency or efficiency of each of these systems has proven to be historical and repeats itself regularly. So some of these statistics, and most of the fires, one sprinkler head, right? 76% of all the fires, one sprinkler head does a job. You get into less than five, it's up to 95% effective. So it really does work. But, as I'm sure we'll talk about, some of the important things is, is it on, right? Is there
Mhm.
maintenance being done? Are all the things, even we could list as preventive, right? Because we're to make sure that thing properly operates.
Yeah.
But I'm 100% on board with let's prevent a fire.
Yep. Okay, so you mentioned the statistic with regard to the one head operating, and that sort of leads us into a common misconception about sprinkler systems, and maybe this misconception might be a factor that precludes a building owner from wanting to install a system. And that is, I think of like Lethal Weapon, or in the movies, right?
Yeah.
uh you know Somebody sets off, they pull out the cigarette lighter to get a fire going for whatever reason, right? The action movie, boom. And when they do, every sprinkler head in that room or in that building activates immediately.
Yeah.
That's not really how it works, is it?
No, not at all. And Jerry, and and I might have thought that same way at one point in my career before I, gained a little bit of knowledge on sprinkler systems. But I think that's even today when you talk to people, like, well, all these heads are going to go off, and kind of have to like take a step back and explain the situation. And no, just one, hopefully one, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
when you think about the design, how many is it designed on, right?
Right, right. Um, the NFPA Fire Protection Handbook has another statistic or quote here that I'll reference in this regard. A properly installed sprinkler system operating in a timely manner will generate less water damage than the later application of hose streams by the fire service. So better, we talk about with insurance, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. If you've got the system and it works as designed, it's not designed unless it's like a deluge system for every head to go off, So talk a little bit, before we get too far down the road here into some of these other topics. A sprinkler head installed in a pipe. How does it activate?
Yeah, so we've got different type of sprinkler systems out there that I don't think we think about a lot of times. So we've got your wet and we've got your dry. We've got a pre-action system and a deluge system, just as Brian mentioned. So the wet sprinkler pipe, what that basically means is we've got water in our pipes, right? And something happens, there's either a fusible link, it could be a bulb that has a different color in it, signifying the different temperature head, the temperature rating for that sprinkler head to go off. And that would simply, both of them basically melt and releasing a valve, which opens the water to allow it to come out of that one head specifically until the next head goes off and the same thing happens. So that's what we're saying is typically we want one head to go off and less than five for sure. Because if you think about it, common sense tells us, boy, the more heads go off, less pressure we have, the less efficient the system will then be, right?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. So talking about system types, we've
Yeah,
got wet, the main types,
yeah,
wet pipe, dry pipe, pre-action systems, and deluge systems. You just mentioned the wet pipe
yeah,
system. Talk a little bit briefly about the other three: dry pipe, pre-action, and deluge.
Yeah, so the wet system, as we just talked about, has water in it. The dry system's very comparable. It just doesn't have the water in it. And the same process happens. It's like, think about a toilet, right? When you flush your toilet, there's a clapper in there. And that's what happens with a dry system. The water is beneath the clapper. And once one of them sprinkler heads activates or melts or the fuse, whatever happens there to signify that we have some kind of concern, that flap will open, the water will rush out to that specific head and work on putting the fire out. But the problem is we've got a delay, right? We've got, I think it's a 30% time delay. Don't quote me on that. I can't recall exactly, but there is going to be a time delay for that water to reach that sprinkler head. Your pre-action systems, pretty similar. First thing that happens is there with the pre-action system, it has an alarm system associated with it. When that alarm system activates or trips, that's when that pre-action trips, so that the water can find its way through the head. So, first thing we're going to do is it's going to detect the fire, sound the alarm, then it's going to open that valve to allow the water to flow to the sprinkler piping. And then your deluge is just what it sounds, right? It's just the heads go out and water deluges the fire. And there's different applications for each one that we're talking about, right? For a wet example, typical manufacturing facility, a dry, maybe where it's exposed to freezing, a pre-action system. That's a little different. I don't run into a lot of pre-action or deluge, but deluge may be an airport or something like that with planes or more flammables. How about, what do you think, Brian? Any good examples for pre-action? A computer room, maybe?
Yeah, something where you've got contents that are susceptible to water.
Yeah.
So you want that double check mechanism, right? Before water will start to actually disperse. So things like art galleries, museums, libraries, like you mentioned, a computer room, potentially somewhere where the material that is under those sprinklers is very susceptible to damage from water. So you want to have that sort of double mechanism before the water starts to get delivered.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we just don't see it a lot with our book at this point. Maybe we will as we continue to grow.
This is Talking Risk, the risk control podcast from FCCI Insurance Group. You can listen to us online by visiting our website, fcci-group.com. Click on Risk Control and select the episode you want to hear. For FCCI teammates, go to Spike, Departments, Risk Control, Podcasts, then select the episode you want to hear. We'll be right back. We've touched on the four main types of systems. And again, I want to stress that the discussion that we're having here this morning is really high level for, sort of directed for property owners, facility managers, and also for risk control professionals like ourselves. But we're not going to get too deep into the intricacies of evaluating adequacy. We're just talking about high level things here with regard to sprinklers, the types, the benefits, the importance of maintenance, so on and so forth. Something that we run into frequently when we're out touring buildings is the difference in how a sprinkler system is designed and installed. So the two primary methods that we run into are either what we call the pipe schedule design method or the hydraulically calculated system. So I think that if you want to, Ralph, talk a little bit about the differences between pipe schedule and hydraulically designed systems.
Okay, sure. So for the first 100 years or so, plus or minus however many years, The pipe schedule system proved to be really effective in controlling fires. But as you can imagine, as we grew, technology grew, industries grew, we started to have warehouse exposures. Then plastics came around, right? And pipe schedules just weren't able to handle the load associated with storage in these warehouses with high storage, different type of commodities, and then specifically getting into your plastics as well. So the BTUs putting out, and that's one thing we tend to forget a lot is BTUs, right? That's why there's so much, and if I start rambling, I apologize, but it's exciting, and there's some good statistics out here as it relates to fire protection, right? Because I personally, we go back and forth on effectiveness of a system, and that's part of our job when we evaluate a system, right? But if you look at statistics and these 90% numbers where sprinkler systems show to be effective, and they're only ineffective, I think 6% of the time from design, tells me a lot. But my whole point here is I typically think if it's commodity 1 through 4, right? I think we're going to be okay with our sprinkler system. It's only when we get the plastics and these high BTUs that concerns me. Just for example, really quick, the BTUs of paper, 7,000 BTUs, wood, 8,000 BTUs, plastics, 15 to 22,000 BTUs. It's the same as gas. So you can see the problem with extinguishing that fire. So I went off on a little bit there. Sorry, Brian.
Well, that's okay. And thinking about the pipe schedule method, that's how they started doing these things back in the late 1800s, right?
Yeah.
So the pre-computer era, and I think that's the big difference between the pipe schedule method of the old days and the hydraulic method of today is the use of computers, and as you mentioned, advances in technology and knowledge. So in the old pipe schedule method, it's literally what it sounds like. There was a schedule on paper that a fire protection contractor would use, and they would evaluate, okay, what occupancy is in my building? What are we doing in the building? How big, what's the square footage? They would consult the charts literally and lay the grid out of the piping and certain size diameters to get the pressure they needed at the location they needed.
Yeah. Yep.
So from a risk control standpoint, when we look at a system, or even for a property owner, if you're interested in knowing what kind of system is in my building, the age of your building can be an indicator. If your building is what would you say, Ralph? Maybe late 1980s. A lot of times, or early to mid 80s, sometime in there is when that transition really started to take place. So if you've got a building built in the 40s or 50s or 60s, there's a very good chance, high probability, that your system was designed via pipe schedule method.
Yeah.
You won't see placards, design placard data attached to the riser on a pipe schedule method. So we have to look up at the pipes to determine, what kind of system it is, what the design is, because there's 3 different pipe schedules, generally speaking. Light, you've got ordinary, extra hazard. And each of them has a different pipe schedule, sizing of pipes. Talk a little bit about the sizing of pipes with pipe schedule versus the sizing of pipes with hydraulic systems.
Yeah, very good. So the sizing of the pipe, and that's one of the ways, Brian mentioned business owners, and are you interested to know more about your system? So there's typically, light and ordinary are going to be the same type of design, and the method is 2, 3, 5. So what that looks at is on that inch line, and we have to be very careful because the older your systems, the less, if we're less than an inch on them end pipes, like 3/4 inch pipe, then we're no longer allowed, and they do have to be removed. So what we're starting out with is an inch line on the end. Then we've got 2 heads on that inch line, right? And then we go up to that next joint. So that's our 3rd head. And that's where we see another jump into a pipe up to 1/4.5. So we're step staring them pipe, right? So our source is maybe a large 8-inch pipe. And then in the end, it's filtering itself all the way down into a 1-inch pipe, where them two extra sprinkler heads are located. And then the difference with the extra pipe hazard schedule is it's a 1-2-5. So same concept, but there's only one sprinkler on the end of that inch line. And then it progresses upward and so forth. So as we go, to 1 inch pipe size, then up to 1.25 inches, then 1.5 inches, then the 1.5 inch continues. And then when I jump up to more than 5 heads, it jumps up to 2 inches, just to make it a whole lot easier. It's stair stepping these pipes, right? From the source, and it's going downward to the end of that line. And there's so many cool things to think about with a pipe scheduled system. When from a design standpoint, and things that Brian and I and our peers look at, because that's one of the things we have to evaluate, right? Hey, is this pipe schedule or is this hydraulic?
Yeah. And now when you look up at the pipes in the ceiling of a hydraulically calculated system,
yeah, they're all going to be the same size. And that's an important characteristic for us to recognize, because we're in buildings, right? 16, 20 foot, 30-foot ceilings, and you're looking up and you're just like, hey. And then you ask whoever you're with, right? That business contact, can you tell what size that is? Are they all the same size? It's just important from an evaluation standpoint, because in the end, we just want to make sure our customers are protected.
So one of the things that is cited as far as a benefit of a hydraulically calculated system is that they're more economical to install because of the uniformity in pipes, more efficient and able to provide more uniform water distribution. So maybe more reliable, based what it's designed for is what it's going to give you, all things, all factors considered, such as available water supply and so forth.
Yeah, and that's from the farthest point out on that pipe. That's what they're designing it for.
We'll be right back. If there's a risk control topic you'd like us to cover, or if you have questions about FCCI's risk control services, send us an email, info@fcci-group.com. FCCI Insurance Group is a multi-regional provider of comprehensive property and casualty insurance and surety products. We cover businesses in 20 states plus Washington, D.C. Our local presence, service, and expertise combined with the knowledge and relationships of our independent agency partners creates a winning combination that sets us apart. To find an FCCI agent partner, visit our website at fcci-group.com and click Find an Agent. Are you an agent interested in working with FCCI? Visit our website at fcci-group.com and click on For Agents. Let's transition here just for a minute into water supply. And when we talk about water supply, what are we getting at, Ralph? Because the water has to come from somewhere. You got a sprinkler system in your building. The water to, get dispersed onto that fire comes from somewhere. And it could be from a variety of sources or a combination. So, Ralph, talk a little bit about water supply, where it comes from, and what the importance of having adequate supply is.
Yeah, it's big time important, right? If we don't have the water, we're not going to be able to put the fire. And, and especially as the dollar values increases of the properties we're talking about. So the water supply, if it's coming from typically a city main for the most part on what we do. There are other sources of water storage tanks, lakes, ponds. So there's a variety of different ways, but typically what we're seeing is the water main. So a sprinkler system has to have at least one consistent source of water, right? In order to be able to, put out that fire. And a lot of times too, I think, we went back to misconceptions, Brian. And a misconception is if I have a sprinkler system, I'm okay. Well, we talked about the 3 different classes, right? Light, ordinary, and hazard. And when we get to hydraulics, we change that up and leave even a little more, right? To light, OH1, OH2, ordinary hazard 1, ordinary 2, ordinary hazard 2, and the same with extra hazard 1 and extra hazard 2.
Yeah.
So there's different water flows associated with each type of design, and based on that occupancy, that's the importance of making sure that water is available. Now, if it's a pipe scheduled system, there are NFPA in the book, you can go and it'll give you different water flows needed for each hazard, right? And then if you get into the hydraulics, it's as simple as multiplying your density by your area, and that's going to tell you how much water you're going to have at that point to put that fire out. There's other variables too, but for the most part, that's what we're talking about.
And when you multiply that number together, if you've got a placard affixed to the riser, that's going to show up in the demand,
Yeah,
right? The demand
yeah,
line that's the demand. So, one of the things we're looking for, if is the water supply adequate, means that the available water currently at that building through a hydrant flow is, if we need 550 gallons, we want to see that water flow test for the hydrant is going to give us at least what we need. And we haven't even gotten into hose streams. But you want to make sure that available water supply is not less than what the system demand requires.
yeah.
If it's less than, then the system's not going to operate efficiently or effectively as designed, and you don't want to get in that situation.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing with water supplies, I sometimes we have to take into consideration is this an old industrial park? Is this a new industrial park? What's been going on in this area that's maybe taken the water away from my system right now because a new building was added? Um, even the time of day, right? That's what I think about a lot of times. If I had a fire in the morning when everyone's showering, or the water's being used, we're going to have less water. So we have to take a little bit and think through these type of things. And remember, the water we're getting is on a certain given day. So it could change, but it's kind of like a hypothetical. That's what we're going with. That's what we got. That's what we're designing our system on.
So let's think about, okay, a case where a sprinkler designer is building out a system for a building in an underdeveloped area that doesn't have a lot of municipal pressure or available gallons. What can the designer and the property owner do to get the required gallons per minute that they need?
Yeah, so we're going to have some type of storage tank on the facility or some other water source, such as a pond, right? We see ponds all the time, and they just add a dry hydrant to that pond. And there's going to be a lot of steps that that proceed that and follow that up too, because we got to maintain that, right? That source of water. But if we're using that or a water storage tank, then we've still got to figure out our pressure, and that may lead into something I'm sure we'll talk about, which be booster pumps, right?
Right.
To increase that pressure, so we can draw water from that static source, right? It's a water sitting there, not moving, so it's static, and then we're able to draw that with the use of a pump to get that pressure up, so that we can meet our demand.
And where would, booster pumps um play a very important role in those properties where you don't have the adequate demand just from the main. Talk a little bit about booster pumps, the different kinds that we see regularly, and where we see them most typically.
Yeah, typically where I see them most is going to be some type of occupancy, a warehouse with high storage. A lot of times they're designed to push water, so you'll see them more in high-rise facilities and things like that. We're multi-storage, where we're trying to push that water up so that every area of that building is properly sprinklered. And the same goes for a warehouse, right? Because we've got a high fire load within that warehouse stored at high heights, so that water pressure can push us up to where we need to be, especially if we're in these rural areas. We don't have that good water source. Maybe we have two water sources, right? And we have the capability to tie into both of them, and we have to figure that out as well, or the engineer does at least. And as far what was we were talking also, Brian, I'm sorry, I draw a blank there.
No, I think you touched on it.
Okay.
Where do we see them and what types? So I think,
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
about.
I was thinking diesel and electric. Is that what you're referring to?
Yep.
The different, how are they powered, right?
Right.
And then the maintenance associated with that, just like with anything else, if we don't maintain things, chances are they're not going to work the way they were designed to work.
Yeah. Why would you maintain your sprinkler system and not maintain your pump? But
Yeah.
we see deficiencies in how booster pumps are maintained. And there's a schedule, there's an NFPA schedule that's specific to diesel and electric systems on, when they need to be powered on and churned and
Yeah.
looked at. So there's all kinds of requirements that need to be followed so that the equipment works in the manner it's designed to when you need it.
Mm.
Um, let's shift now and talk about evaluating sprinkler systems. So this will be a little bit more towards um, our profession, and when we're looking at a property and a sprinkler system, and it's also useful for a property owner to understand what we're looking for and generally how we go about evaluating their risk. So,
Mm.
I think of we've got basically two methods that we're using, right? When we go into a building, it's got a sprinkler system. We're asking ourselves two questions right off the bat. What are those?
And the questions are, is this a storage occupancy or is this a manual or a non-storage is the easiest way to put it.
Yep. So in FPA, in the standard for installation of sprinkler systems outlines different types of occupancy, defines them, and it also has a section on storage. So talk a little bit about the differences. When we go in there, what if we're looking at a facility, when are we going to use the occupancy criteria and when are we going to use the storage criteria?
Yeah, they go hand in hand a lot of times, right? For example, we could be in a woodworking operation where we have a manufacturing facility. So at that point, we're going based on the occupancy. And NFPA 13 lists different examples of occupancies associated with light, ordinary one, two, extra hazard one, extra hazard two. So if it's that type of occupancy, then we can look at it and say, okay, this is a manufacturing facility. Then based on NFPA 13, this fits into an OH2 guidelines, and then that triggers how we follow it and based on certain design criteria. The other side would be that same operation. They're probably storing some lumber or some finished goods somewhere within that building. So we also have a storage area that we have to start looking at to figure out, first of all, what's our commodity? There's typically four commodities, commodity one, commodity two, three, and four. And each one of them, if you look at it, commodity one is less hazardous or is less hazardous than commodity four, right? As you go back. And then in addition to that, and all them commodities, by the way, are also listed in NFPA 13 that give people that do what we do a little bit of understanding of how that fits into what we're evaluating. And then if we're getting into plastics, then we got group A, group B, and group C plastics, with group A being the worst and group C being the less hazardous, if you could say that. And then there's paper products, right? There's all other kind of things that we get into that are also have to be evaluated because they're part of that storage within that structure, within that property.
I think of tires, flammable
Oh,
liquid,
flammable liquids. Yep.
and all the more hazardous a commodity is from a flammability or combustibility standpoint means that the design density is going to have to be greater, right? We're going to need more water, and we're going to need bigger orifice heads. We're going to have to be able to put more water onto that commodity.
Yeah. Yeah. Just as I mentioned earlier with them BTUs, we just don't think about them but when you think about gas and how hot it burns versus a piece of paper. So that's a good illustration of these commodities we're talking about, right? Paper in your office may be a class one, but if we're storing a bunch of flammables in there, then our system's going to be, then BTUs are a lot higher. So we're going to need a lot more water to be able to put that fire out.
Right. Yeah, occupancy, or an office type exposure is considered a light hazard, right? And you've got paper and things of that nature in your office environment, but the difference is in a warehouse setting, you've got things that are piled high. You've got that same type of material, but it's on racks, it's on pallets, and the higher it is, the more challenging it is to control once a
Yeah,
fire starts.
yeah, it really is.
This is Talking Risk, the risk control podcast from FCCI Insurance Group. You can listen to us online by visiting our website, fcci-group.com. Click on Risk Control and select the episode you want to hear. For FCCI teammates, go to Spike, Departments, Risk Control, Podcasts, then select the episode you want to hear. We'll be right back. Other things that, and we've sort of touched on it, but maybe we can go into a little bit more detail here on things that present extra challenges to sprinkler system design and operation. And the first one I want to touch on is something we've mentioned, that's plastics, right? And primarily, group A plastics give us the most concern. Talk a little bit about the plastics risk, what it looks like, because people, we hear regularly when we're talking to insurance agents and building owners, oh, well, plastics, that's not flammable. It doesn't burn.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's take a step back, right? And the illustration I use a lot of times is It's a Wonderful Life, right? In A Wonderful Life, George is talking on the phone and he's talking to his buddy and he wants to see if they want to get in business. And what they did, they invented plastics, right? So that's when this all started. And we got to look at plastics, right? Plastics, what are they made of? They're made of petroleum-based products. So hence the oils and all the things in there are that's why them BTUs are so high when we're talking about plastics. So that's why these won't ignite. And there's just so many things that they come across on why are we concerned with plastics.
Yeah.
And again, it's because of that fire load and the heat generated from the plastic. And we're not even talking about things like free-flowing plastics, right? That can melt and spread like lava across a facility, then catching something else on fire. Thereby now more heads are going off. We're getting less pressure. So you could see the game you're getting into, right? And you're starting to lose at that point.
And, even thinking about plastics, something else we see, especially in our footprint here, is furniture manufacturing and storage of components of furniture.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, well, that's fabric, but
yeah,
it's really if it's a synthetic and it's made of things like polyester, it's a plastic.
Yeah. Not only that, it's group A, right?
Right. So, it's not the same as a cotton t-shirt or a natural type of upholstery. We're talking about synthetic fiber, synthetic material that is based, on it's plastic.
Yeah.
So, your couch in your living room, if it's cloth, and it's got synthetic components, it's probably considered a plastic. Not to mention also the cushion inside that couch that you're sitting on.
Yes. Yeah. We're getting to a point where most things are made of plastics.
Right. Right. It's the world we live in. It's the world we have to deal with. And from an insurance standpoint, it's something that we have to pay close attention to when we're looking at property risk, right? Plastics are everywhere, and they require, careful attention to detail when a system is being designed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's still a lot of unknown hazards we don't know about associated with plastic. And one good example is just what firefighters are dealing with, right? And increased cancer in firefighters because they're fighting these fires.
Next item of storage that presents a special emphasis for us would be flammable and combustible liquids. And I know we've mentioned it already, but do you have anything else that you can think of to add that might be important for us when we're looking at sprinklered risks that have flammable and combustible liquids?
It's important, and Brian and I have talked about this in the past, probably on some recent podcasts, but Just that business owner having understanding that he has flammables in his buildings, and the safety data sheet associated with that flammable liquid is going to give guidelines to our customers on how to properly store these things to reduce our exposures. So that's why I go back to preventive measures, right? What preventive measures can we implement in order to reduce our chances of even having a fire so that it never goes there? So that's why I look at that business owner. What's his knowledge of what he's got going on in his facility? Where is he storing these items? How hard? We have customers, that aren't allowed to store things high based because of the demand or the design of their sprinkler system will not cover it at a certain height. So one of the things we do is want to lower them. So if we can get them to understand things like, hey, segregation, right? Let's segregate certain chemicals from other chemicals. Maybe it's something that's potentially very wicked, like methyl ethyl ketone, that we're just keeping that stuff out of the building. So there's little things like that. And I think a big part of it is for Brian and I and our peers is to be able to, to educate these customers, because a lot of them unfortunately don't have the understanding of the things we're talking about. So if we can control those things up front, and there are so many of them, we're better for it, and our customers better for it.
Yeah, and I think about some of the things that we can do to help mitigate the risk. It could be something we could recommend, something as simple as utilizing a listed flammable liquid storage cabinet if there's not a ton of liquids in the building. Something like a cabinet could be used to reduce the risk associated with storage of a small to moderate amount of flammable and combustible liquids. Because NFPA 13, the sprinkler guideline, as well as NFPA 30, flammable and combustible liquids code, they outline specific amounts of liquid by type that can be stored within a facility. Sprinkler design comes into that as well. So something like a cabinet can be used to control those. Ralph mentioned other things that we can suggest, like lowering storage heights. Also, we've had customers that take their flammable liquids and they move them outside away from the building.
Yeah. I've got contractors who will put them in a Connex, right? Which is great. We have mattress operations that do the same thing, right? They're recognizing it, they're figuring out, and a lot of times it may be because they had a fire, then they learn from that. And unfortunately, that's just part of our business, right? We tend to learn and then the light comes on. And what we're trying to do is get the light come on before you have an accident.
Hydraulic fluid use areas. Touch on that and how they increase the hazard definition.
Yeah. So if we're dealing with plastics and we're extruding, we're mold, whatever we're doing with plastics, typically there is some form of diesel fuel or hydraulic fuel, associated with that process. And in each one of these extruders or whatever it may be, there is a reservoir of hydraulic fluid within there that's part of the mechanism of this piece of equipment to allow it to do its job. Well, what happens is that the hydraulic fluid normally is listed as combustible if you look at the safety data sheet. But the problem is when it's under pressure and you get pinhole leaks in your lines, the hydraulic fluid atomizes in the air and now becomes flammable. So typically when we look at this, it's going to be an ordinary hazard group 2 occupancy if they're doing this type of operation. And then once we add that hydraulic fluid, then we're increasing that to extra hazard group 1 because of the fire hazard associated with that. Now, there are a lot of controls, to help reduce something happening, like there's automatic shutoff switches on pumps where if there is a leak and it senses pressure loss, that thing shuts off immediately. So there are things like that. Another thing we would like to do is maybe we could substitute, because we were talking about ways we can prevent these things from happening. There are some substitutes out there. The problem is business owners, they're not as efficient as hydraulic fluid and they don't like to use them. It's just like paint, right? Use a water-based paint versus an enamel. One doesn't always work as good as the other. So they take that chance, where if we can get them to downsize and use a different chemical, we may be ahead of the game.
We'll be right back. If there's a risk control topic you'd like us to cover, or if you have questions about FCCI's risk control services, send us an email, info@fcci-group.com. FCCI Insurance Group is a multi-regional provider of comprehensive property and casualty insurance and surety products. We cover businesses in 20 states plus Washington, D.C. Our local presence, service, and expertise combined with the knowledge and relationships of our independent agency partners creates a winning combination that sets us apart. To find an FCCI agent partner, visit our website at fcci-group.com and click Find an Agent. Are you an agent interested in working with FCCI? Visit our website at fcci-group.com and click on For Agents. Pallet storage.
Pallet storage, boy, they're pallets are a toothpick in a warehouse waiting to catch fire. I mean, if you ever see a pallet, right, they've just got toothpicks all over them. And typically that's what catches fire. And that's an ideal situation if you're in your backyard, right? If you want to burn a fire, throw some pallets on there because of the air that's able to circulate through the pallets will just get that puppy burning quick and hot. So there's certain rules, and this is something we see a lot because if you think about pallets in the facility, they're pretty much moving for the most part, right? You're there one day, you'll see a whole pile. You come back next week, they could be gone. But still, even though they're in there, there are certain rules on how we store our pallets. There's what I think you got to store them in piles, 4 feet high, 6 foot. That's when I go to the book, or we actually have a resource document that outlines that for our customers on how to properly store pallets.
What is the best way to control your pallet exposure?
Just keep them outside.
There you go. Yeah, and generally speaking, especially with a lot of our customers, that's possible. Where it becomes more difficult is if you've got a pallet that has to be certified for some type of food grade storage or sensitive use where they need to be held inside. And that's when you get into the guidelines in NFPA 13 with regard to storage of those. And it includes, I think it's stacks. You can have a pile of four stacks together. They've got to be separated by a certain amount of distance, kept at a certain maximum height. Then you can have another pile so many feet away, and it's got to have so much clear space to other commodities within the building. So pallets are what we refer to as idle pallets not in use. That are just there waiting to be used for something or discarded or broken down or whatever the case may be. Pallets are a significant fire risk for a property owner, and I think that a lot of our customers don't maybe have that understanding. So if we can help educate them on the risk associated with it, we try to do that whenever we can. And we do, as Ralph mentioned, we've got a pallet storage flyer in our risk control resources that outlines how to adequately store them so that you can set yourself up for effective fire protection if a sprinkler needs to operate.
Yeah, and that's not even mentioned the plastic pallets, right? That we're getting into as well.
Which I think in the most recent version of NFPA 13, the plastic pallets it was either in the 2022 version or maybe the 2019 version. Plastic pallets have their own specific area now where we're seeing more and more detail about those and the challenges that they present to a sprinkler system.
Yeah, and that's a very good point too, because that's another thing as part of our job we run into. A sprinkler system in 2016 may have been adequate, but based on today's updated NFPA book, it may not be adequate. So there's a lot of little things that part of our job where we're trying to help. The main thing I think is we're trying to help our customers understand this and then prevent that fire, right?
So we have mentioned and just touched on a variety of special exposures that add hazard to a property. And let's take a couple minutes here to talk about some best practices related to commodity storage. And when we say commodities, it's the contents in your building, the things that you're storing high piled on shelving on racks, things in your building that are fire load, things that will burn, that will increase your risk. So special special best practices related to commodity storage. What comes to mind in general terms? What are some things that business owners can do to pay attention to their commodity storage practices?
Yeah, I think one of the first and most important things is to have an understanding of what your commodities are. Um, there's certain things that, we can do also, owls, keeping owls free and clear so fires do not jump from one to the other. What are we storing that on within our racks, right? What is our storage method? Is it a solid shelf? Is there capability for water to come through from where the sprinkler systems are located? What kind of obstructions do we have? And with all these things here, I wouldn't anticipate that a business owner would know this kind of stuff. That's where I would say, hey, that's what we do, right? That's why we are here to help. And I got a cheesy line. I'll do one of my isms, and it's, whoever you pay money to, right, make them earn it. And that's where we come into play. Make us earn it. We will give you feedback, on, hey, if we got a bunch of mixed commodities in here, why don't we let's keep our plastics below 5 feet, and let's adjust other areas so that we can make sure the sprinkler system, we're giving it the best chance to do its job.
I've got our blueprint for safety commodity storage best practices flyer in front of me, so I'm gonna
Okay.
a few of these as well. Encapsulation of stored items increases fire hazard.
Mm,
So how are your goods wrapped? If
yeah.
you've got plastic around the sides and over the top, and you're basically encapsulating or sealing what's inside, that increases your fire risk.
Yeah. We want to pre-soak stuff, right? So that's the reason we would not fully encapsulate it. So we can pre-soak it so the chances of it burning are reduced.
As storage height increases, so does the fire hazard. No brainer, pretty much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Maintain at least 18 inches clearance between top of storage and sprinkler deflectors.
Mm-hmm.
Maintain 36 inches clearance between stored materials and heaters, furnaces, and electrical panels. Here's one that we mention regularly we ask about when we're meeting with a customer. Invite the local fire department to visit annually so they become familiar with your storage arrangements.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone, every business owner out there to do that. There's been bad things that have happened. Let's protect our firemen, right? They're out there doing a service for us. So let them in your building. They're there to help.
Absolutely. I mean, they're the ones that are going to respond when you need them. So if they have knowledge of how your building is laid out, where the high hazard items are, they're going to be able to attack that fire more quickly, more effectively, and reduce the amount of damage associated with the fire.
Yep.
So very, very important. Invite them out, have them walk around, develop a plan with them, some type of response plan for your facility so that you're setting yourself up for success. All right. Last, we've got two more things to cover here, and then we'll wrap up. Wanted to talk about sprinkler maintenance best practices. Real high level here. Talk about, Ralph, maybe what are things that a business owner should do at a minimum?
From a maintenance standpoint, right, he has to come have at least annual visits, right? That we're that we're having a qualified and licensed sprinkler contractor coming in and properly inspecting and performing the needed maintenance on our systems on an annual basis. Now, that could vary too based on the type of design and system you have, where that could increase to quarterly or semi-annually, but at a minimum, we would ask you to be annually in there. We'd like to see everything monitored if possible, and that's part of your maintenance too. Do these alarm systems work? Am I doing my flow tests to make sure that everything works? Well, I'm drawing a blank on other things, Brian, right here but sprinkler heads, right? Do we have an adequate amount of sprinkler heads? What are the temperature rating? Is there a wrench in there? Most customers aren't going to exchange or replace heads. But one of the requirements is from a maintenance standpoint, are these things present in there? Is the documentation that the maintenance has been done in there? And is it available to us? Because that's one avenue for us to be a resource, right? To help you understand potentially things. And one of the things we do also, is give you different choices. We're not just going to say one thing. Maybe there's but 3 different things we could do to prevent this fire from a maintenance standpoint, even. Some of the things we would try to offer our customers.
And when we look at the reasons why sprinklers fail to operate, 64% of the time was because the system was shut off.
Yeah.
Manual intervention defeated system, 17%, damaged components, 7%, lack of maintenance, 6%, inappropriate system for fire, 5%. So that, those statistics tell me a lot of things. Number one, having a system is better than no system. Even if it's not necessarily completely adequately designed for the current occupancy, right? Only 5% of the number there, is because the system was inappropriate for the fire. But that system being shut off 64% of the time, if one of those things that's required is some type of alarm on the control valve or a lock, right? So that it can't be turned off.
Yep.
And if you don't have those things in place, number one, you're not compliant. And number two, if somebody in your facility isn't regularly checking on that system, you would not know if that valve had been closed or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I've read a statistic that a sprinkler system in a building, regardless of adequacy of the design, that the average loss that you save or protect yourself is 34 to 68% lower than having a fire loss without a system. So that's where I talked about earlier too, about, commodities 1 through 4 versus plastics.
Right.
I think with a sprinkler system that's operational, functional, properly maintained, there is a percent efficiency where we could live with. If we're in plastics, it's a whole nother ball game, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and one thing we need to point out too, and there's just so much to talk about, but extra hazards pipe schedule systems aren't even allowed to be designed anymore. So that's one of the things that we're looking at in the buildings, right? Is it an old pipe schedule system that's extra hazard, but it's covering a high hazard occupancy? We need to delve into that further.
This is Talking Risk, the risk control podcast from FCCI Insurance Group. You can listen to us online by visiting our website, fcci-group.com. Click on Risk Control and select the episode you want to hear. For FCCI teammates, go to Spike, Departments, Risk Control, Podcasts, then select the episode you want to hear. We'll be right back. We have a resource for our customers that includes a checklist for system inspection. So if you need a resource, you can get that through ExpressServe or through one of us, your risk control consultants, that outlines those things. But definitely, at least once a year, you need a contractor to come out and do the normal inspection. And if they identify things that need to be addressed, don't ignore them. Just go ahead and knock them out, because a little bit of cost to change out a gauge or replace a head or fix something that's broken could mean the difference between saving your building or not.
Yeah, exactly.
And maintenance and inspection and documentation of it is also critical to our final topic, which is ISO, sprinkler evaluation for insurance premium credit. Talk a little bit about ISO, what they do in this regard, and what we see common things that maybe preclude an owner from getting the credit that they should.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And in most of our states, we have this service available where ISO does come out, does a property inspection. They have a couple different reports, a few reports. They've got the BURB, which is the Building Underwriters Report, and they have the ASGR, which is Automatic Sprinkler Grading Report. Is that what it's called, the grading report?
Yep.
And that's where we go off on that, but we have to be careful when we're reading and using that tool right there, because they're human just like us, right? And they may make mistakes, but what they're coming out and inspecting the system. They're looking at certain things like how many water sources do you have, is the maintenance in place, are there any obstructions, just a variety of different things. Then they apply a grade to it, and I believe set is 70 the passing grade. um,
70 is what we use at FCCI internally for our underwriting guide.
Okay, as we look at that as saying that's a passing grade, but the problem is there's a lot of problems, to tell you the truth. When did that inspection occur? Who was the occupant at the time of that inspection, right? That could potentially change that. They give water supply information, so there's a lot of good information available to assist us. But one of the important things too ISO does is they put a combustibility on the contents within the building, which one of our guidelines here at FCCI is based on that combustibility rating of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Based on the building value tells us, hey, we require a sprinkler system or we don't require a sprinkler system. So ISO also puts that on there, but that's subjective, I think. And I think we need to look into that ourselves. And that's the one cool things about the GCR risk control team is we do it as a team, and we always are bouncing stuff and we are learning every single week. So that's just us getting better to help our customers.
Yeah, and ISO, they have a grade too, and theirs may be 70 as well for when they consider a building sprinklered or not sprinkled. Um, and I know they're when they invest it or when they inspect a system and they determine based on the score that it is not getting a sprinklered rating,
Oh, good point.
that affects property insurance rates for our customers,
Yeah,
right? If their system fails and ISO says non-sprinkler, that affects the rate.
yeah,
You're going to get a rate as a building owner for sprinklered or non-sprinklered risk. And for obvious reasons, a risk that is sprinklered has a better rate than a non-sprinklered risk. So the building owner should do anything they can to have their score be as good as they can get it within things they can control. We look at the ISO reports across FCCI, and we have a sprinkler committee that's made up of people from across our regions that can help with complex systems and evaluation of those. But one of the things that we see, that report, it's a good starting point. But we like to evaluate that adequacy ourselves. And there's things that we can suggest to our customers to help them improve that grade. If there's, aside from the system design and whether it's adequate, there's some simple things that a building owner can do. Have those plans on file, right? Have them available for that inspector. Have your inspection reports available. If you have a hydraulic system, make sure the placards are there, because those are all things they take off points for.
yeah, yeah. Earlier I said that make us earn it, right? If you're getting an ISO visit, let us know. We'd love to come out and help you and walk you through that to make sure that you're getting the proper credits associated with your sprinkler system. So it's just one of them areas where, FCCI, I believe we're here to make a difference, man. We're the industry leaders here in the Gulf Coast. So call us, please. We're here to help.
Wrapping up, benefits of sprinkler systems in general. We've run the gamut, and we're up against our time limit for the day. But what comes to your mind? Benefits in general.
I got to think number one is, saving lives, right? Sprinkler systems are designed to save lives. until the fire department can get there so we can get out of the building and then properly save that building. Number one, we're safe. And by the way, look at the statistics. It is working. From a saving lives standpoint, we still incur property loss, but we're saving lives. So number one would be that. Number two would be, better rates, right? Protection of your building from, any potential future loss that's going to affect you guys and affect your employees and affect the bottom line over a long period of time. What else, Brian? I know you got your sheet there.
Well, reducing the average loss as well by
Oh,
1.5 to 2/3.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a no-brainer, especially with the values of buildings today. For a business owner, their property is a huge investment. Just like for us as individuals, our homes, is our biggest asset.
Yeah.
Well, if that building goes down, then you're out of business for an extended period of time if you don't have some other type of contingency plan. So
Yeah.
it saves lives, reduces damage to your property in the
Yeah.
event of a fire, reduces downtime. So it's just a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, especially if you have one, right? That's what we're saying. Is just let's properly take care of it so that it can do its job. And the number 30, 40, 68% lower loss with a sprinkler system that's functioning.
There you go. I think we should leave it there, Ralph. I appreciate you taking time to come on and talk today about automatic sprinkler systems.
Woohoo!
If you have any questions for us as an FCCI policyholder, feel free to reach out to your risk control consultant or get in touch with anybody here at FCCI, and we will help you any way we can. We look at it as our mission is to help our customers reduce risk and be successful in what they do.
That's right.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
You can listen to Talking Risk online at fcci-group.com. Click on Risk Control and select the episode you want to hear. Recording copyright FCCI Services, Inc. 2022. The opinions expressed in this recording don't necessarily represent those of FCCI, its personnel, or affiliates. This recording is provided for informational purposes only, does not attempt to identify all potential hazards or remedial actions, and is not intended as legal or professional advice. FCCI, its personnel, and affiliates shall not be liable for any loss, death, damage, or expense arising out of your reliance upon this recording. You are solely responsible for complying with applicable law, including any changes in the law, and for the safety of your operations. Please consult your legal advisor with any questions or concerns. For Talking Risk, I'm Brian Harris.